The Nevada highway stretched into the night like a ribbon of black silk, swallowed by darkness and punctuated only by the occasional flicker of neon from distant gas stations. Inside a black Cadillac Eldorado, the hum of the engine was a fragile calm. Elvis Presley sat rigid in the passenger seat, white jumpsuit catching the dim glow of the dashboard, eyes scanning the road ahead. Beside him, his bodyguard's hand hovered near the door handle, every muscle taut. Ahead, lights flickered, a swarm of chrome and leather. The Hells Angels had appeared as if conjured from the desert itself, their motorcycles forming an unyielding wall across the asphalt. Engines growled, taillights glared like molten rubies, and the smell of gasoline and dust clung to the air. The world outside seemed to pulse with menace, yet inside the car, a fragile silence held, bracing for the inevitable collision of worlds. No one moved. The road became a stage. This was not a concert, not a crowd, not a performance. This was raw, unpredictable, human confrontation. A moment hung in the air, electric and dangerous, the kind of night that would be whispered about for decades, the night the king himself would step into legend in ways no spotlight could illuminate. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The neon of Las Vegas still shimmered faintly in the distance as the black Cadillac Eldorado cut through the sweltering Nevada night, its engine humming with a low, relentless growl. The city's lights bled into the horizon, blurred by heat waves rising from the asphalt, a mirage-like shimmer that made the world seem both infinite and fleeting. Inside the car, Elvis Presley sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees, the sequins of his white jumpsuit catching the dim glow from the dashboard. He was exhausted, every muscle in his body craving rest, but there was a fire behind his eyes, a restless, unspoken need to feel the pulse of America, not from a stage, not from the lens of paparazzi cameras, but on the open road, under the stars. His manager had suggested taking a private plane, a sterile, safe cocoon above the desert. But Elvis shook his head. "I want to see it as it is," he had said, voice calm but insistent. "The roads, the gas stations, the people who are just living their lives. I want to feel it all." And so here he was, speeding down the highway, the air thick with the scent of gasoline and desert dust, tires humming on asphalt, the night stretching endlessly ahead. The quiet inside the car was almost tangible, broken only by the soft murmur of his bodyguard, whose eyes never strayed far from the road. "Sir, it's risky out here. Hell's Angels sometimes do checks, roadblock style. You know how it is." Elvis leaned back, letting the hum of the engine fill the spaces between words. "I know," he said softly, almost to himself. "I just want to see. I want to understand." There was a shadow of fatigue beneath the gold shimmer of his hair, a hint of the pressure he carried, the relentless schedule, the crowd screams that seemed to echo endlessly, the rumors in the press questioning whether he could keep up the act, whether his health could endure the grind. Outside, the desert night seemed to stretch into infinity, dotted by the occasional blink of a distant gas station sign or the faint reflection of headlights in the rearview mirror. The road was deserted for miles, a black ribbon curling through sagebrush and rock, the silence punctuated only by the occasional call of a night bird or the distant hum of a truck engine. The moon hung low, casting pale silver streaks across the hood of the Cadillac, making the car look like it was gliding across liquid metal. Elvis's mind wandered briefly to the concert just hours earlier. The roar of the audience, the bright lights, the smell of the theater, the faint haze of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. On stage, he was invincible. the king of a kingdom built on music, charisma, and the sheer force of his presence. Off stage, though, the world felt different, fragile. He could feel the pulse of the night, the way the desert seemed both welcoming and indifferent, and it stirred a strange mix of exhilaration and vulnerability within him. The guard shifted uneasily, noticing the headlights flickering ahead. "Sir, you might want to slow down. There's something on the road." Elvis's brow furrowed. "Something?" His voice was calm, measured, but there was a flash of curiosity, of anticipation. "I'll see for myself." And then, in the distance, the first glimmer of chrome appeared, reflected in the Cadillac's headlights. A dozen motorcycles lined across the highway, leather-clad riders with patches glinting in the starlight, engines growling like restless beasts. They weren't moving yet, but their presence was enough to make the car slow instinctively. The black jackets, the skull insignias, the faint glimmer of helmets catching the moonlight, they all added up to a tableau that could have been a nightmare in any other context. Inside the Cadillac, the air shifted. The calm that had enveloped Elvis moments before now vibrated with tension. His bodyguard's hand hovered near the door, ready for action. The road that had seemed infinite and free now felt constricted, a narrow channel between potential danger and the unknown. Dust rose from the desert floor as the bikes revved, engines snarling in unison. It was as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for the first move. Elvis leaned forward slightly, studying the silhouettes in the distance. His pulse was steady, but his mind raced with a mixture of calculation and instinct. This was not a stage. There were no scripts, no rehearsed applause, no cameras to capture a carefully crafted image. This was raw, unfiltered life. Real people with their own codes, their own rules, their own judgment of who belonged and who did not. For a moment, the world contracted to the distance between the Cadillac and the line of motorcycles. Every reflection in the chrome, every flicker of a headlight, every rev of an engine was amplified, magnified. Elvis could almost hear the silence between the sounds, the small human pauses that spoke louder than any roar. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension flow out in a long, deliberate sigh. "Let's see who we really are tonight," he murmured, almost to himself, almost like a prayer. "Not the king, not the star, just me." The road stretched ahead, the desert dark and indifferent, and yet it felt charged with possibility. A story was about to unfold, one that would be whispered in bars, hotels, and living rooms for decades to come. A story that began not with a spotlight, but with a Cadillac, a highway, and a man willing to face the unknown on his own terms. And then the first motorcycle moved, a single headlight cutting through the darkness. The others followed, engines growling in synchronized warning. The night was alive now, vibrating with threat and anticipation. And in that charged moment, the quiet resolve of a man who had conquered stages and hearts across the world met the raw, unpolished reality of the open road. Elvis straightened in his seat, eyes narrowing slightly, voice calm but firm. "Bring it on." The night held its breath. The roar of the engines hit like a tidal wave, rattling the Cadillac from its carefully measured hum to a trembling growl. The black motorcycles, lined across the desert highway, were a wall of chrome and menace, their headlights slicing through the darkness like knives. Dust swirled around them, reflecting the glare of the lights in ghostly eddies that danced across the asphalt. Each rider sat upright, rigid and alert, the leather of their jackets creaking with a harsh familiarity born from countless nights on the road. The insignias, skulls and flaming letters, spoke of allegiance, of danger, of a code as old as the roads they rode. Inside the car, Elvis's bodyguard stiffened, his hand hovering over the door latch. "Sir, we can't just—" he began, his voice tight with the tension that made every muscle in his body taut. Elvis held up a hand, cutting him off. The gesture was calm, deliberate, almost regal in its stillness. "No," he said softly. "We stop." But not to hide. We stopped to see his eyes were fixed on the lead rider, a figure half hidden in shadow, helmet catching the faint glint of moonlight. There was no fear there, only a deep curiosity, a hunger to understand the rhythm of this world he had only glimpsed from afar. The first bike revved again, louder this time, the sound vibrating through the car's metal frame, rattling papers and jingling the small medallions hanging from the rearview mirror. A biker leaned forward, gesturing with a gloved hand, his voice carrying across the distance. "Hey, King! You scared of the real road?" His laugh was sharp, a bark that echoed off the desert emptiness. Elvis's lips curled into a faint smile. There was a pulse to his veins now, a rush of adrenaline mingling with a strange sense of calm. He opened the car window halfway, letting the warm desert air pour in, scented with gasoline, dust, and the faint tang of metal from the motorcycles. The sound of engines was almost deafening, but there was clarity in the chaos, a rhythm he could read, a pattern he could follow. The lead biker pushed his bike forward slightly, the chrome gleaming like a blade. "You think you're gonna roll through here, all shiny and famous, and we'll just let you slide? You think we don't know what kings are made of?" The words carried challenge and mockery, the tone sharp, like sparks striking stone. Elvis's gaze didn't waver. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but his posture was upright, composed, almost ceremonial. "I'm not looking to slide," he replied, his voice carrying easily over the roar of the engines. "I'm looking to understand." Another rider laughed, a bark full of sarcasm and danger. "Understand? You? From the stage? You think you know what this road teaches?" Elvis inhaled slowly, feeling the vibration of engines through the soles of his shoes, through the floorboards, through the very air. There was a strange poetry to it, a dance of menace and expectation. He opened the Cadillac door, stepping out onto the warm asphalt, the leather of his boots meeting the gritty, uneven surface. The white jumpsuit glowed faintly in the motorcycle lights, a stark contrast to the black of their jackets and the desert that stretched endlessly around them. The moment stretched, taut and silent, despite the cacophony of engines. Dust curled around his ankles, catching in the headlights' glare, and the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and sweat. One biker, braver, or perhaps more foolish than the others, extended a bottle of beer toward him. "Drink!" he shouted, his grin wide, sharp. "Or too scared to touch the dirt." Elvis paused, letting the silence grow heavier than any word. Then he looked directly into the eyes of the biker who had spoken, steady and unflinching. He didn't reach for the beer. He didn't shift, didn't flinch. His calmness was a counterpoint to the chaos, a silent statement of presence and purpose. Another voice broke through, mocking his music. "Your songs. Girly music. This ain't for men." The words were thrown like daggers, and the sound of engines seemed to swell in tandem, as if urging him to react, to show weakness. But Elvis didn't shout, didn't fight. He inhaled again, slow and deliberate, the warm desert air filling his lungs. He let the words hang in the charged silence, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. The motorcycles hummed and growled around him, but now the rhythm felt almost musical, a percussion accompanying the stillness of a man who refused to be intimidated. And then he spoke, quietly, firmly, without aggression, yet carrying authority that seemed to make the night itself lean in to listen. "I know what it is to be judged," he said, "to be laughed at, to be underestimated. But here I am, and I will not hide. Not from the stage, not from life, not from you." A pause stretched across the desert highway. Engines idled, tires shifting slightly on gravel. The wind carried his words in ripples, stirring the dust at their feet. The bravado of the bikers faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering across faces hidden beneath helmets. The leader of the group stepped forward, the tallest of the riders, his shadow stretching long and lean across the asphalt. Every muscle in his body suggested confrontation, every tilt of his head daring Elvis to retreat. But the king stood still, a lone figure of confidence in white, unflinching in the face of raw, unbridled danger. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat audible, each breath weighted with anticipation. The desert around them held its own silence, broken only by the idling of engines and the faint whisper of wind through the sagebrush. For a moment, it was as if the world had shrunk to the space between the Cadillac and the circle of leather-clad riders, a liminal zone suspended between threat and revelation, between challenge and understanding. Elvis's gaze swept the circle, his eyes steady, calm, perceptive. Every detail registered, the gleam of chrome, the twitch of hands near grips, the subtle tension in shoulders. And in that moment, the king understood the road, the bikers, the raw pulse of life beyond the stage. Not through fear, not through violence, but through presence, through composure, through the quiet audacity of a man who refused to be diminished by reputation alone. And so the night held its breath, waiting for the next move, waiting for the story to take shape. As the Cadillac and the Hells Angels faced each other, the desert around them vast, dark, and indifferent, yet charged with the electricity of destiny. The desert night seemed to hold its breath, the horizon a blur of darkness, broken only by the glint of chrome and the occasional flicker of distant neon. Elvis stood on the asphalt, the Cadillac behind him humming with restrained power, the hum of tires on pavement, a muted counterpoint to the rumble of the motorcycles surrounding him. He could feel the heat radiating from the engines, the scent of gasoline sharp and almost tangible in the cool night air. His heart beat steady, not with fear, but with the curious thrill of standing in the middle of something primal, something raw and unfiltered. One biker, younger and wiry, stepped forward, cracking a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. He held out a bottle, green glass glinting under the headlights. "You afraid of getting a little dirt on those shiny shoes, King?" His voice carried a note of mockery, but beneath it was a probing edge, testing limits, searching for cracks in the calm veneer. Elvis paused, letting the bottle hang in the air, its presence almost comical in contrast to the tension wrapping the group like a second skin. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he let his gaze sweep the circle, taking in the subtle cues, the twitch of a hand near a throttle, the slight shift of a shoulder, the way some bikers leaned on their machines, waiting. There was challenge here, yes, but also curiosity, an unspoken invitation to engage on a level deeper than words. "You think I care about dirt?" he said quietly, almost conversationally. His voice was calm, low, carrying a weight that made the younger biker hesitate mid-laugh. "I've walked streets that could swallow a man whole, and stages where the lights burned hotter than the desert sun. Dirt never scared me. What scares me is standing still while the world spins past." A ripple of surprise passed through the bikers, subtle but unmistakable. The leader, a figure half shadow, half metal, narrowed his eyes, trying to parse the king's calm. The group was tense, every muscle coiled, engines idling with that low, threatening purr. The desert wind kicked up, stirring dust in small, swirling vortices around the tires and boots, and the smell of burnt rubber mixed with gasoline in a scent both intoxicating and dangerous. Then a voice rang out, sharp and skeptical. "Your music!" one biker shouted over the hum of engines. "It's for the girls!" Real men don't cry over tunes like that. His tone carried bravado, meant to provoke, meant to test the limits of the quiet man in front of them. A chorus of chuckles echoed, motorcycles vibrating in unison as though mocking the statement. Elvis didn't flinch. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he let the moment stretch, drawing in the silence of the desert, the quiet spaces between the roars, the emptiness around them. The pause was almost tangible, thick and heavy, and the young biker's bravado faltered as he realized his words had not touched the man he sought to provoke. Finally, Elvis spoke, his words calm but deliberate, cutting through the night like a knife made of velvet. "I've sung for millions, yes," he said, his voice low, resonant. "But I've also lived. And living means facing things you can't control, people who judge you before they see you, and roads that test more than your skill, roads that test your courage, your heart." He paused, letting the engine's hum fill the brief silence. And courage? Courage is not proving yourself to strangers. Courage is standing when the world expects you to fall. It's standing even when it scares you. A slow murmur ran through the bikers, almost imperceptible at first, like the first notes of a distant song. Their laughter, their taunts, the brash arrogance, all seemed to stall under the weight of his calm certainty. Some shifted uneasily, fingers brushing chrome, eyes flicking between the king in white and the dark shapes of their comrades. The younger biker who had held out the bottle glanced away, a faint tension in his jaw, as if realizing that the threat he imagined was more fragile than he believed. The leader of the Hells Angels advanced a step, every movement deliberate, measured, as if weighing the man before him like a scale. His shadow fell long across the asphalt, merging with the dust kicked up by the idling engines. He stopped a few paces away, the quiet between them almost sacred in its intensity. "You talk big," he said, his voice rough, resonant, cutting through the desert night. "You got guts, I'll give you that. But words don't make a man real. Actions do." Elvis looked him square in the eye, unwavering. "Actions?" he repeated, soft yet potent. "Then see this for what it is. Not a fight, not a challenge. Just me, standing here, with nothing but what I am. See if that counts." The wind picked up again, carrying the faint scent of creosote and sand. Dust swirled between them, hugging the edges of the bikes and the Cadillac, creating a haze that softened the harsh lines of the motorcycle's chrome. The tension was palpable, as if the desert itself was leaning in to witness this unusual standoff. A moment where the bravado of 1,000 rides, the danger of countless roads, met the quiet, fearless certainty of a man who had faced fame, fortune, and expectation alike. Then, almost imperceptibly, the first biker shifted his weight. Another followed. The engines idled lower, the tension giving way to curiosity. There was a change in the air, subtle but undeniable. A shift from challenge to recognition, from mockery to cautious respect. The desert held its breath, waiting for what would come next, as man and machine, legend and outlaw, faced each other under a sky blanketed in stars, suspended in a moment that would become the stuff of stories, whispered for decades. And Elvis, standing tall, alone but unyielding, understood that the night had already begun to bend. That respect was forming, silently, quietly, in the unlikeliest of places. A circle of leather, steel, and dust, and that the road ahead would carry more than him tonight. It would carry a lesson in courage, presence, and the power of standing without fear. The desert seemed to close in around them, a muted void interrupted only by the faint hissing of cooling engines and the occasional scrape of a boot against asphalt. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that presses against your chest and makes each inhale deliberate. Elvis stood there, calm yet alert, the white of his jumpsuit catching the harsh glare of headlights, his presence almost surreal amidst the storm of chrome and leather circling him. The night was a living thing, shifting and breathing with the tension of men poised on the edge of confrontation. The leader of the Hells Angels, a man whose mere step seemed to command space, advanced slowly. Each footfall on the gravelly asphalt resonated, punctuating the silence that had fallen over the group. The biker's face was a study in contrasts, scars etched across his cheek, eyes sharp with experience, yet shadowed by curiosity. He stopped a mere 10 feet away, the engines around them still humming, the motorcycles forming a half-circle like silent sentinels. For a heartbeat, the night held still. Even the desert wind seemed to wait. "Look, King," the leader said, his voice low and deliberate. "Words won't do much out here. You got guts standing alone, but out here, it's action that counts." His hands were relaxed, but there was a subtle flexing, a readiness to move. His men mirrored him, fingers brushing leather and metal, eyes narrowing, reading every small gesture. Elvis tilted his head slightly, the light catching the glint in his sideburns, his expression serene yet commanding. He raised one hand, not in threat, but in a gesture of calm authority, like a conductor preparing an orchestra for the first note. The desert around them, normally harsh and unyielding, seemed to soften. He spoke, and his voice, though quiet, carried with uncanny clarity over the hum of machines. "I grew up where people laughed at my dreams, where doors slammed in my face, and where every step forward was a fight. I've known the sting of being underestimated, of being dismissed. And yet, here I am. Not because I had to fight with fists, but because I refused to stop walking forward, no matter the noise, no matter the doubt, no matter the fear." A subtle shift rippled through the bikers. Laughter that had been ready to erupt died in throats. Some looked down at their boots, uneasy under the weight of words that carried more power than any engine roar. The younger bikers, the ones who had taunted him moments ago, were caught in a liminal space between defiance and awe. Their bravado felt fragile, like a bubble about to burst. "You talk about courage," the leader said after a pause, his voice rougher, tinged with a mixture of suspicion and begrudging respect. "But courage isn't just standing on a stage with lights and fans screaming your name. Courage is standing when nobody's watching. Courage is being real when the world expects you to be a show." Elvis nodded slowly, a faint smile curling at the edges of his lips. "Exactly," he said. "Courage is more than appearances. It's in the moments nobody notices. It's in the way you treat those who test you, the way you honor your word, and the respect you give to those who live by a code, even if it's not the same as yours." The silence that followed was heavy, almost palpable, punctuated only by the occasional whine of a motorcycle engine or the scuff of leather boots. The leader's eyes, dark and calculating, softened slightly as he studied Elvis. The tension that had been taut like a drawn bowstring seemed to relax ever so slightly. He stepped closer, close enough for the air between them to feel almost tangible. charged with the weight of shared understanding and unspoken acknowledgement. "You talk like a man who's been through fire," the leader said, his tone no longer mocking. "And maybe you have. But fire leaves scars. Are you sure you can handle it if we don't like the song you sing tonight?" Elvis let his gaze sweep the circle, taking in every eye, every twitch, every flicker of doubt and curiosity. He didn't flinch. "I've handled it," he said, his voice steady, almost tender. "I've handled it every time someone thought I couldn't. And I'll handle it tonight, tomorrow, and every day after. Because the only thing I fear is not trying at all." The biker leader studied him for a long, tense moment. Then, as if an invisible switch had been flipped, he let out a low chuckle, surprising in its warmth. The younger bikers exchanged wary glances, unsure of what this new tone meant. The leader's hand, rough and scarred, lifted slowly and came to rest on the shoulder of one of his men, a signal that the confrontation had shifted, that the moment had passed from threat to cautious recognition. Elvis took a small step back, giving the circle space, his posture still relaxed but ready. "We all have our battles," he said softly, almost conversationally. "Some are loud, some are quiet. Some are fought with fists, some with words. But courage is always tested." A subtle, almost imperceptible nod came from the leader, and the younger bikers exhaled collectively, as if a long-held breath had been released. Engines idled lower, and the once prickling tension began to transform into something heavier, more contemplative. For the first time that night, the bikers weren't just testing a celebrity. They were recognizing a man who stood in front of them fully, fearlessly, on his own terms. The desert night, once a stage for confrontation, now became a witness to understanding. The cold asphalt, the swirling dust, the gleaming chrome, and the faint scent of gasoline all seemed to settle into a fragile harmony. Words had done what threats could not. Respect had been earned, silently, in a place where muscle and bravado usually reigned supreme. Elvis, standing alone yet not lonely, felt the weight of the night's pivot. What had begun as provocation had transformed into recognition, the kind that doesn't need cheering crowds or flashing lights. The king and the outlaws were connected by the simplest, most potent thread: acknowledgement. And in that recognition, the desert seemed to hum, as if approving the rare spectacle of courage meeting courage, and words meeting steel with unbroken composure. In that fleeting, luminous moment, every biker realized that this encounter would not be forgotten. And Elvis, sensing the shift, understood too. The night had changed, and the road ahead would carry a new story. A story that would outlive the roar of engines and the glare of headlights. The night air shifted, thick with anticipation, yet lighter than it had been minutes before. Elvis remained in place, his white jumpsuit now slightly dulled by the faint dust raised by the idling motorcycles, but his posture was unyielding. Around him, the Hells Angels shifted uneasily, each man processing the unexpected turn from hostility to tentative curiosity. The youngest, brashest among them, a wiry figure with a mane of dark hair spilling from beneath his helmet, let his impatience show. He threw a half-empty bottle down the side of the road, the glass clinking against the asphalt with a sharp, defiant note, as if to challenge the calm that now hung between them. Elvis didn't flinch. He didn't step back, didn't raise a hand in defense. Instead, his eyes, steady and unblinking, met the young bikers with the weight of unspoken experience. "If your children saw this," he said softly, voice carrying easily over the faint hum of engines, "what would they think of the man throwing the bottle?" The words were simple, almost conversational, yet they struck deeper than any threat or boast could. A ripple of tension ran through the circle. Laughter died in throats. Smirks faded into thoughtful frowns. The biker leader, a man whose presence seemed to anchor the storm around them, raised a hand sharply. Engines idled into silence, the younger men stopping mid-shift, the glint of chrome reflecting the light from distant neon like distant stars in an electric sky. The leader's voice, low and deliberate, carried a weight that demanded attention. Enough! It wasn't just a command. It was a judgment. Every eye turned to him, every muscle waiting for the next cue. "We stop now!" His gaze swung to Elvis, sharp but not hostile. "You're not our enemy. Hell, you're the first man to stand here and speak without fear or bluster. That counts." Elvis exhaled slightly, the smallest movement, but enough to show a release of the tension coiled in his chest. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted a hand in acknowledgement, a gesture of mutual recognition rather than surrender. "I respect those who live by their code," he said, voice calm but firm. "Even if our worlds are different, if you follow your rules, and I follow mine, we can stand here without trying to destroy each other." His words were a bridge, fragile yet strong, crafted from understanding rather than power. A shift occurred among the younger bikers. They exchanged glances, uncertain. The bravado that had guided them moments ago now seemed less like strength and more like armor, fragile and heavy. One of them, the same who had thrown the bottle, lowered his gaze, fingers brushing the seam of his leather jacket, as if reconsidering the meaning of toughness. The air was no longer merely charged with potential violence. It now vibrated with recognition, the acknowledgement that respect was a currency stronger than intimidation. The leader of the Hells Angels took another step forward, the soft scuff of his boots against the asphalt audible in the stillness. "Music, huh?" he said, a faint humor in his voice, though not mocking. We listened. We heard it out there, through the noise and lights and glitz. You talk straight. You don't hide. I respect that his hand, roughened by years of labor and battle, reached forward, brushing Elvis's shoulder lightly. The contact was simple, human, yet it resonated like a signal, the unspoken acceptance that the confrontation had ended, that the circle of potential conflict had been disarmed without a single blow. Elvis nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement of the unspoken bond forming in that desert expanse. The youngest bikers stiffened, unsure how to react, but the leader's hand came down again, tapping lightly on the nearest engine in a gesture of finality. Engines rumbled softly, not in threat, but in acceptance, the powerful machines now part of a quiet ritual of recognition. Dust swirled at their wheels, catching the headlights like sparks, marking the transition from aggression to cautious camaraderie. The night stretched, elongated by the quiet but pregnant with meaning. Every biker who had been ready to test him now reconsidered the definitions of strength and courage. In the soft gleam of chrome and the harsh glow of headlamps, they could see the man behind the music. Not the king, not the celebrity, but someone who carried his own trials, his own scars, his own victories in silence. Elvis lowered his hand, the gesture complete, and turned slightly toward the Cadillac waiting behind him. The leader's voice followed him, not as a threat, but as a mark of understanding. "Go on," he said, voice carrying over the asphalt. "Ride on. We'll remember this, King. We'll remember that courage sometimes walks alone." Elvis smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth lifting in that subtle, disarming way that had once made stadiums erupt into cheers. He slid the door open and stepped in, feeling the familiar embrace of the car's interior. The engines purred as he started the ignition, the headlights cutting through the night with new clarity, guiding him down the long, empty road. The bikers parted silently, a living corridor of respect and acknowledgement. Their laughter from moments ago was gone, replaced now by quiet contemplation. A shared understanding that a man's strength was not always measured in fists or fury, but in the way he could command respect with composure, humility, and insight. As the Cadillac rolled forward, the desert wind chasing them with faint whispers, the night seemed transformed. The asphalt, once a stage for confrontation, now felt like a path toward something greater. An understanding, a connection forged not through violence, but through courage, presence, and words that carried more weight than any threat ever could. And somewhere in the shifting darkness, the youngest biker looked after the retreating headlights, a slow grin spreading beneath his helmet. "Maybe the king really is different," he muttered, and for the first time, the night felt a little less wild, a little more human. Elvis lingered outside the Cadillac, the desert night stretching endlessly behind him, cool winds stirring the edges of his white jumpsuit. The stars above seemed unusually bright, each one cutting a pinprick of light through the blackness, as though bearing silent witness to the unlikely detente that had just unfolded. His hand rested lightly on the car's roof, a gesture more contemplative than protective, as he turned slowly to face the group of Hell's Angels who had gathered around. Their silhouettes, jagged and imposing under the neon glow of distant signs, had lost none of their gravitas, yet the edge of hostility had vanished, replaced by something new, something almost fragile: curiosity and respect. Elvis's voice, calm yet carrying an unmistakable authority, broke the silence. "I'm performing tomorrow night," he said, and the words seemed to hang in the air, almost daring them to react. "If any of you have the courage, come, not as adversaries, but as guests. Witness what it is to follow your own path without the need to harm others." He didn't smile. He didn't plead. His eyes, steady and luminous, met theirs, and in that gaze was a challenge wrapped in invitation. It was a test of character, one that required humility and bravery in equal measure. The wind swept across the desert, tugging at their jackets, whipping the dust into spirals that glittered in the dim light. The tension that had defined the past hour now held a different shape, taut but expectant, as if the night itself waited for their response. Laughter erupted among the bikers, raw and unpolished, echoing off the distant hills, but it was no longer the harsh, mocking sound from before. This laughter carried a trace of astonishment, a recognition that the man before them had not yielded to fear or provocation. A few nodded, almost imperceptibly, the movement betraying a reluctant acknowledgement that their assumptions about him had been wrong. The leader, standing slightly apart, yet clearly in command, regarded Elvis for a long moment. Then, with a quiet, almost conspiratorial nod, he spoke. "Maybe we will come, King," he said. "We'll see." There was no derision in his tone, only the measured cadence of a man accustomed to weighing risks and rewards, someone who knew instinctively that respect, once earned, was a rare and precious currency. Elvis allowed himself a small exhale, a release almost imperceptible, yet it felt monumental. He turned back to the Cadillac, sliding the door open with the grace of someone accustomed to commanding both attention and discretion. Inside, the familiar leather smelled faintly of dust and engine oil, yet it was comforting. The dashboard lights glowed softly, casting a halo around his hands as he rested them on the steering wheel. The motor hummed to life beneath him, a subtle but insistent vibration that resonated through the car's frame, grounding him after the charged, almost surreal encounter. He could feel the weight of the night pressing against his senses, the endless stretch of asphalt, the desert silence, the faint scent of gasoline lingering in the air. But he also sensed something else: possibility. The impossible had shifted into the plausible. The bikers, meanwhile, dispersed slowly, some walking back to their motorcycles, others lingering for a final glance. There was no fanfare, no dramatics, only the quiet acknowledgement of a line crossed and a barrier broken. The youngest of the group, whose impetuosity had nearly sparked chaos, lingered for a heartbeat longer than the others, eyes fixed on Elvis's retreating figure. There was a faint, almost imperceptible smile beneath his helmet, a recognition that courage was often less about speed or strength and more about standing firm in one's convictions. The leader, after ensuring his men had dispersed, walked to the edge of the road, head tilted slightly as if pondering the desert's vast emptiness. "See you tomorrow," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else, a promise couched in uncertainty, yet carried with sincerity. Inside the Cadillac, Elvis felt the weight of the night begin to settle differently. The confrontation, the tension, the delicate negotiation of respect. It all coalesced into a strange, quiet triumph. He turned the key, the engine growling to life, and eased onto the road, the beams cutting through the desert darkness. The highway stretched ahead, endless and forgiving, a ribbon of asphalt guiding him toward the city lights of Las Vegas. The contrast between the raw, unpredictable energy of the desert encounter and the structured, almost theatrical anticipation of the concert hall was stark, yet it filled him with a strange, invigorating clarity. By the time the Cadillac reached the outskirts of the city, the neon signs reflecting off the car's chrome like fractured rainbows, Elvis's thoughts were already half on the performance to come. But a part of him remained tethered to that desert stretch, to the Hells Angels and their unspoken acknowledgement. In a world dominated by spectacle and celebrity, he had found a moment of authenticity, a fleeting but undeniable connection that transcended fame, music, and myth. The night wound down with a kind of serenity, yet the residue of electricity lingered, the desert air now infused with possibility. When the Cadillac rolled to a stop at the hotel, Elvis didn't rush inside. He lingered a moment, gazing at the distant lights of Las Vegas, thinking of the men he had met, the unspoken codes they shared, and the way respect, once earned, could bridge worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. The city's noise and glamour awaited him, but the quiet power of the desert, the unexpected alliance, had already altered the course of what was to come. Tomorrow, he knew, would be different. The lights of the showroom sparkled like a galaxy captured in glass, reflecting off the polished brass rails and the glossy black floors. The audience was a tide of faces, each one expectant, eager, as if the very walls had absorbed the vibrations of anticipation from countless nights before. But tonight, for Elvis, the energy in the room carried an undercurrent of tension, unseen yet palpable. Somewhere among the glimmering crowd, tucked in the shadows, were the men from the desert, the Hells Angels who had tested him on a lonely Nevada highway and had left with a mixture of astonishment and respect. Their presence was not announced, not flaunted, yet he sensed it, like a tremor beneath the surface, as he stepped onto the stage. The orchestra's first notes faded into the cavernous hall, and the spotlights converged on him, bathing his white jumpsuit in a radiant glow. Elvis inhaled deeply, the familiar scent of polish, perfume, and anticipation mingling in the air. His fingers grazed the microphone stand as if grounding himself against the enormity of the moment. The murmurs of the audience softened, their collective breath held in anticipation. And then he began to sing, not with the flamboyant bravado that Vegas demanded, but with a weight and solemnity that silenced even the restless whispers. From the back of the hall, the bikers observed, sitting rigid, faces stoic and unmoving. Their leather jackets contrasted sharply with the glittering spectacle around them, a reminder of the raw, untamed world from which they had come. Initially, they maintained the same reserved, guarded posture they had adopted the night before on the highway. But as his voice carried through the hall, shifting seamlessly from powerful crescendos to tender, delicate notes, a subtle change began. The youngest among them, the one who had been impulsive, restless, and brash in the desert, was the first to lean forward slightly. His hands, once fidgeting on the handlebars of his bike, now rested quietly in his lap, and for the first time his eyes betrayed emotion, something between awe and contemplation. Elvis sensed the shift. With a flicker of thought, he altered the set list, instinctively, without hesitation. The next song was not the one the audience expected. It was Peace in the Valley, a spiritual hymn imbued with longing and hope. The room seemed to hold its breath. The piano notes trembled softly, then strengthened, carrying with them a quiet, almost reverent authority. Each word he sang struck with deliberate clarity, each pause and inflection deliberate, cutting through the glimmer and glamour of the stage. The congregation of faces before him, both fans and strangers, seemed to quiet in unison, as though the song had drawn a line between the transient spectacle of entertainment and the enduring power of human connection. The bikers shifted subtly in their seats, a silent acknowledgement that this man, the king, was not merely a performer. He was a force capable of bridging worlds. Their skepticism, once sharp as a blade, dulled in the presence of his unwavering authenticity. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the leader leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The light from the stage caught the glint of a cigarette lighter in his hand, but he didn't light it. He simply watched, absorbed. The melody wrapped around them, dissolving the barriers that circumstance and reputation had erected. By the second verse, the youngest biker's hand twitched toward his chest, a gesture of internal reckoning. He swallowed, a quiet, audible sound amidst the hush. Another member exhaled slowly, the movement deliberate, almost ritualistic, like a man marking a personal change. The leader's gaze remained steady, unwavering, yet there was a subtle softness at the corners of his eyes, an acknowledgement of the vulnerability and the truth embedded in the song. For the first time, they were seeing him not as a figure of celebrity or spectacle, but as a human being capable of empathy, capable of connecting beyond the superficial. The hall seemed to pulse with the unspoken dialogue between performer and audience, between past confrontation and present understanding. The fans in the front rows noticed the bikers too, those shadowed presences at the back, and whispered among themselves, curiosity mingling with awe. Elvis's voice rose, then softened, each note carrying the resonance of someone who had walked through hardship and emerged with a rare, unshakable composure. The contrast between the gaudy lights of Las Vegas and the raw human connection of that song could not have been starker. It was a moment of transformation, unannounced, unplanned, yet undeniably profound. As the final notes faded into a reverent silence, the audience remained motionless for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause, not merely for the technical mastery of the performance, but for the emotional truth they had witnessed. The bikers, too, stood, not in the flamboyance of spectacle, but with measured, deliberate respect. One by one, they rose from their seats, their leather jackets rustling softly, the motion echoing in the expansive hall. The youngest offered a small nod in Elvis's direction. The leader followed with a slight tilt of his head. The recognition was complete. The line had been crossed from suspicion to acknowledgement, from hostility to respect. Backstage, the scene was electric with the aftermath of the performance. Stagehands whispered among themselves, fans pressed against barriers, but the echo of the song lingered, intangible yet palpable. Elvis moved quietly to the side, catching his breath, heart still thumping with adrenaline, yet tempered by the satisfaction of having reached across an impossible divide. The presence of the bikers backstage, previously unthinkable, now seemed almost natural. The night had begun with the stark contrast of celebrity and rawness, a tension poised on the edge of confrontation. But it concluded with a fragile, luminous unity, forged not through aggression, but through honesty, courage, and the unflinching willingness to reveal one's true self. Elvis understood, in that rare moment of clarity, that he had not merely sung a song, he had created a bridge between two worlds, showing that respect, empathy, and courage could traverse even the most unexpected distances. And as the curtains fell, leaving only the lingering glow of the stage lights, he knew that this was only the beginning of an extraordinary connection, one that would echo far beyond the walls of the Las Vegas showroom and into a story that would endure for decades. The roar of applause still lingered in the hall, echoing off the gilded walls, but backstage, the world had narrowed to a quiet, charged corridor. The air smelled faintly of hairspray and cigarette smoke, mingling with the sharp tang of sweat and tension. Elvis, heart still thumping from the performance, wiped the dampness from his brow with a silk handkerchief, and tried to anchor himself to the calm he had cultivated over decades of touring. Yet a subtle unease crept in. He sensed that tonight, the balance between worlds, his glamorous stage existence and the raw, unsparing reality of the desert, had not fully settled. A shadow flickered at the edge of the corridor. At first, Elvis thought it was another member of his entourage, someone eager to share backstage gossip or praise. But then the shape solidified, moving with deliberate caution. The leather-clad figures of the Hells Angels emerged from the dimly lit hallway, boots soft against the polished floor, eyes intent and serious. Not a word of mockery, not a trace of bravado, only the silent weight of men accustomed to confrontation. They paused a few steps away, observing him like predators who had been disarmed, yet remained wary of their own vulnerability. Elvis straightened, smoothing his hair, and studied them in return. There was no pretense in their stance, no attempt to assert dominance, only quiet assessment. The leader of the group, the same man who had halted the Cadillac on the desert highway, stepped forward, his face inscrutable, yet his posture revealing a strange respect. The corridors of power, the stage lights, the millions of adoring fans, none of that mattered here. This was raw, unfiltered human presence, and Elvis understood that tonight's performance had opened a door he had never anticipated walking through. The leader's voice, low and deliberate, broke the tension. "We came to see if the man on stage was the same as the man on the highway," he said. His words carried weight, unhurried, deliberate. "Now we know. We're here to meet the man, not the myth." The simplicity of the statement struck Elvis. It was not praise, not flattery, but acknowledgement of an unspoken truth. He had met their challenge, not with violence or defiance, but with composure, courage, and humanity. One of the younger bikers, the impulsive one who had flung the bottle days before, hesitated, then removed his chain necklace, placing it reverently on the corner of a nearby table. "This is for you," he said quietly, almost ashamedly. "A token, not of ownership, but of respect. You're not our enemy." The gesture, small and silent, carried more meaning than any accolade or applause could convey. Elvis accepted the unspoken offering with a nod, feeling the weight of it. Not the metal, but the intent, the recognition that human connection had triumphed over suspicion. The room seemed to shift imperceptibly. The air that had been taut with tension now hummed with the fragile energy of reconciliation. Elvis, ever the keen observer, noticed the subtle changes, the slight relaxation of shoulders, the tentative eye contact, the quiet, careful gestures that replaced what might have been scorn or confrontation. The Hells Angels, icons of intimidation, were stripped to their core values: loyalty, respect, and the unwritten code by which they lived. And in that moment, Elvis realized that his own code, the authenticity, humility, and courage that had carried him through the glare of stardom, had intersected perfectly with theirs. The conversation that followed was surprisingly human. Words were measured, exchanged with deliberate care, avoiding any pretense or unnecessary bravado. The leader spoke of their journey across the desert, their loyalty to one another, and their admiration for those who dared to live authentically. Elvis, in turn, spoke of the relentless pressures of fame, the solitude hidden behind the stage lights, and the rare moments when one could truly connect with others as equals, not icons. The exchange was not a negotiation, not a performance. It was an honest dialogue, an unpolished meeting of worlds that rarely intersected. At one point, the youngest biker leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the floor. "We thought you were just a figure in a story," he admitted, voice low, almost ashamed. "But you're a man, like any of us. And that changes everything." The simplicity of the statement struck Elvis more than any fanfare or applause ever could. It wasn't admiration for his fame, nor awe at his voice. It was recognition of shared humanity. That acknowledgement, fragile and profound, carried more weight than any headline or critical review. For a long while, they simply existed together in that cramped backstage room. The contrast between glittering sequins and worn leather, the tension of past conflict, and the quiet of present understanding created a fragile, luminous equilibrium. No one spoke of enmity. No one recalled past hostility. There was only the tacit understanding that trust could be forged in moments of courage, in gestures both grand and small. As the night waned and the crowd's excitement outside began to fade, Elvis realized that this encounter, unexpected, unplanned, and intensely human, had accomplished something few concerts ever could. He had not merely sung, he had bridged worlds. And as the bikers prepared to leave, slipping silently into the shadows from which they had come, Elvis knew that the bonds formed tonight, fragile though they were, would endure far longer than the bright lights of Las Vegas or the fleeting applause of the audience. It was a moment suspended in time, a rare intersection of fame and raw authenticity, of courage and acknowledgement, of music and unspoken understanding. And in that moment, Elvis felt something deeper than triumph or relief. He felt the quiet power of human connection, a force that could transcend ego, expectation, and fear. As the corridor emptied and silence returned, he touched the edge of the chain left on the table, a symbol of a respect that needed no words, and smiled quietly to himself. This was a victory of the heart, a bridge built in the most unlikely of places, and it would ripple outward in ways both subtle and profound. Long after the lights had dimmed and the crowd had gone home, weeks passed, and the Nevada desert remained indifferent to human dramas. The heat shimmered off the asphalt. The same roads where engines had roared and tension had crackled now lay quiet under a pale sun. But whispers traveled faster than heat waves. Reporters, always hungry for the extraordinary, caught wind of an unusual sight. A group of Hell's Angels, notorious for their fearsome reputation, had appeared at a local charity gala, delivering a sizable donation to a children's foundation. The kind of foundation Elvis had long supported, one that helped underprivileged kids learn music, read, and dream beyond the confines of circumstance. Elvis watched the report unfold on a small television in his dressing room. His reflection shimmered in the screen. White jumpsuit slightly creased, hair still sculpted into its iconic wave. Eyes tired, yet alert. A quiet smile touched his lips. Not of pride, but of recognition. He had never orchestrated this outcome. The encounter on the highway, the silent moments backstage, the gestures of respect. None of it had been planned, and yet here was proof that a few honest words, extended with courage and humanity, could ripple outward in unexpected ways. The phone rang. It was his manager, voice laced with curiosity and amazement. "Elvis, you're not going to believe this. They're asking to meet you again. The bikers. They want to thank you personally." At the gala, Elvis leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had faced countless fans, media storms, and scrutiny, yet the thought of meeting them again filled him with a unique mixture of apprehension and anticipation. He knew the encounter could be volatile, or it could be transformative. And after everything that had happened, he trusted the latter. Later that evening, the gala hall shimmered with gold chandeliers and the soft rustle of elegant gowns. The scent of polished wood and fine perfume mingled with the undercurrent of anticipation. Children laughed softly, holding guitars and notebooks, unaware of the tension that had preceded this day. The Hell's Angels entered, not with swagger or bravado, but with measured steps, careful glances, and an unmistakable deference in their posture. They were strangers, and yet familiar. A living reminder of the night when worlds collided on the Nevada asphalt. Elvis approached them slowly, the distance between them shrinking with each step. The leader extended his hand first, firm and unflinching. "We wanted to make sure you knew your words, your actions, they mattered. They reached us, and not just us, the people we influence, the kids, the families. It matters." His voice was quiet but resonant, carrying the weight of sincerity that required no embellishment. The youngest member, still holding the edge of the chain he had offered in that cramped backstage room, stepped forward. "We weren't sure what to expect when we stopped you on the road. We thought you were untouchable, a figure in a story we'd only heard. But meeting you, seeing you stand as a man among us, it changed our perspective. We want to be better. And tonight, we want to help you with that mission." He handed over an envelope, discreet, substantial, filled with the donation earmarked for the foundation. Elvis accepted it, eyes glistening. He looked around the room, at the children playing softly near the stage, the gala guests who watched silently, and the bikers who had once seemed like embodiments of chaos. "Sometimes," he said, voice steady but filled with quiet emotion, "all it takes is a few words at the right moment, spoken with honesty and courage. And sometimes those words can grow into something greater than any song or show." No applause followed immediately. There was only a lingering silence, profound and reverent, as if the room itself absorbed the gravity of the moment. Then a child tugged at Elvis's sleeve, asking him to sign a small notebook. He knelt, pen poised, eyes meeting theirs. In that gaze, the bridge between fame and authenticity, between myth and man, was fully realized. The Hell's Angels remained in the background, silent, but present. The leader leaned toward Elvis, almost conspiratorially, and said, "You changed more than our night, man. You've shown a path we didn't expect to see. We respect that. And the world, maybe the world will notice too." Elvis nodded, a subtle, quiet acknowledgement, knowing that respect, like music, carried a resonance that could outlast headlines, scandal, or fleeting attention. As the gala concluded, the bikers left quietly, the echo of their boots soft against the marble floor. Outside, the Nevada night stretched vast and open, just as it had the night they first crossed paths. Elvis returned to his Cadillac, now waiting under a lamplight, reflecting the desert stars above. The car was silent, the engine off, yet he felt an unusual stillness in his chest. Peace, connection, and the rare satisfaction of knowing that something meaningful had taken root. He sat for a long moment, hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, gaze fixed on the empty road ahead. The same road where fear had once lingered, now open, wide, and inviting. The night seemed to whisper a quiet truth, that courage, respect, and human honesty could transcend status, reputation, and expectation. That even in a world obsessed with spectacle, the simplest gestures carried the deepest power. And as he drove into the darkness, leaving the gala behind, Elvis understood something profound. The story would become legend, not because of his fame, not because of the applause, not because of the notes he sang, but because he had chosen to meet life and its people on a human level. That choice, fragile yet unyielding, would echo in ways visible and invisible, shaping lives and hearts far beyond his own. The highway stretched endlessly before him, empty and serene, a ribbon of freedom and possibility. And somewhere in the silence, a truth resonated, clear and eternal. The king's power was not only in his voice, but in his ability to touch hearts, mend divides, and remind humanity of its own capacity for respect, courage, and reconciliation.